Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway.
And me, Gayatri.
The darkest hour comes just before the dawn, just when it looked a distinct possibility that the Korean Peninsula would turn to ash from north to south. Peace appears to be breaking out on the slopes of the Winter Olympics.
The mesmerizing possibility of North and South Korea marching jointly under a single flag in the Olympic opening ceremony has some others going off-piste and refusing to take yes for an answer.
To help us make sense of it all, we have Rod Wye, Associate Fellow, Asia Programme of the Royal Institute for International Affairs, Chatham House, a considerable expert indeed. Rod, thanks for joining us on the Sputnik. To paraphrase that wonderful Hollywood movie, The Producers, where did it all go right?
Well, the initiative came from the North Koreans, and they made these overtures saying that they would be interested in talking about taking part in the Winter Olympics and talking about things, to which the South responded, yes, let's go for it, because they're very, very keen to see the situation on the peninsula calm down a bit.
Well, the Winter Olympics could have been the cause of a disaster, of course. It could have been a site of North Korean provocations and all kinds of other nasty things to disrupt the Games. So you can see why South Korea would want to protect the Games. But it is quite surprising to me, I'm nowhere near the level of expertise as you, that the South Koreans have grasped this possibility of rapprochement with such alacrity and so enthusiastically. So much so, I get the impression that President Trump, who might have been said to be spoiling for a fight, might not be prepared to take yes for an answer.
Well, the South certainly are very, very keen to see the things calming down on the peninsula. They don't want any kind of military action to break out, because if there is going to be one clear loser there, it would be the South. So they don't want it. They were very keen to find a way to start talking to the North, to find some way to start the political dialogue again. I think it's not so much the Olympics. Quite honestly, the Olympics are an excuse rather than a reason. It is about the wider politics of it all, and that's what interests South Korea, not so much a successful Olympics.
The South Koreans are playing a bit of a diplomatic dance maneuver between the North and the US, because they want to please both. They want peace on the peninsula, but also stay close to the Americans.
They do, and it's not easy for them because the Americans are still hugely suspicious of the motivation of the North Koreans, and there has been no give on the North Korean side on that crucial issue of their continued program to develop a credible nuclear threat against the United States.
Exactly.
Now, the word on the grapevine, at least the grapevines I listened to, is that both Russia and China played a role in pushing North Korea to take this first step. Do you give that any credence?
I think it all depends on where you sit. I don't really know, and I don't think anybody really knows quite why the North decided to move in this way at this particular time. Clearly, sanctions hurt, but I think it's too much to say that it was sanctions that drove them to it. Clearly, there is a lot of pressure from South Korea, from Russia, from China, to find a diplomatic solution. But the North Koreans are not particularly amenable to pressure from anyone. And I think it was for their own reasons that they decided to do it. And if you look at it from a North Korean perspective, it's not such a bad idea. Things were getting as you said in your intro, really very serious. And it is not a bad idea to find some way of scaling things down a bit. And they have done that very successfully because they knew that any kind of olive branch stretched out to the South Koreans would be grabbed with both hands, as indeed it was.
How disappointed is Donald Trump? In a way, it shoots his fox, doesn't it?
I mean, to be honest, if you are talking about macho posturing over who's got the biggest and most...
The biggest button.
The biggest button.
That works.
I think that, you know, yes, maybe. But in terms of the United States' interests, it is quite clear that it is in their interest to find some way of dealing with, managing the North Korean problem that does not involve serious military action. And to that extent, I think it is certainly welcome to most of the rest of the world, and I think welcome to American policymakers too.
At least to the generals around the president.
Who would have been faced with an impossible task.
Indeed. Now, is it realistic, do you think? I know the Olympics, as you say, is in a way a bit of a side issue, but for me it's a mesmerizing possibility that there would be one Korean delegation at the Winter Olympics marching under one flag. I never thought I'd see that day.
Well, let us see. At the moment, I think talk is quite easy, and it's a nice thing to sort of talk about these things, to get down to the detail of quite what the flag would be, who would hold it, how high it would be, whether there would be other national
symbols. Could be a banner
involved.
with one on each side holding one pole.
It could, but these things are really very serious for the negotiators on both sides, and I think it will be very difficult to come to an agreement on exactly what they
The
might
fact
do.
we're even talking about it is mesmerizing.
It's fascinating and it's great. I mean, from the point of view of almost everybody, it is a really good thing to see a little bit of a climb down in that tension on the Korean Peninsula. But you know, the fundamental issues have not been addressed.
No, I want to turn to those now. You said they wanted to talk about things, which is probably a very good way of putting it. What might some of those things be?
Well, the easy kind of things are family reunions and that sort of exchanges, people-to-people exchanges, north-south. There might be some discussion about some kind of further mechanisms for dealing with crises.
They've reinstated the military hotline.
They've put back the hotline, but you know, some more formal mechanisms for dealing with things, more regular talks on the political side about the relationship between the two Koreas. But that still, in its way, avoids the fundamental question of the North's continued programme of developing a credible deterrent. And the problem with these kind of things is that you can never feel satisfied that you've got security, because security is one of those things that sort of moves away. The nearer you get to it, again, it sort of moves further away. And the more that the North Koreans seek really sort of tangible assets to preserve their security, the more worrying and frightening it becomes.
Well, it might be that they already have all the assets they think they need. It takes two to tango, doesn't it? The North Koreans would say, I think with some justification, that they face an existential regime change threat, and therefore they need the weapons that would deter that. And at the same time, the South Koreans have every right to expect that their neighbour will not blow them all up. But if I were negotiating that, if we were a two-man team there, I reckon we could do it. We could de-escalate the war games on the North Korean border. We could accept that North Korea is now a nuclear power. After all kinds of countries are nuclear powers now, even though they weren't supposed to become one. Israel, India, Pakistan, and maybe some of the Gulf countries soon. So in a way, the nuclear horse has bolted, and isn't it better, therefore, to just recognize it as a fact?
What has not yet become an absolute fact is the ability of the North Koreans to threaten the continental United States. And so long as that has not become a fact, it is clearly a matter of high policy for the US to make sure that it doesn't become
Even though
a fact.
the US has more than enough weapons to wipe out everybody in the world.
Yes, but you still, I mean, even if I can punch you on the face and knock you over, I still don't want to be hit by you. Yeah. And, you know, a nuclear weapon is a horrific thing.
Of course.
And no American president could stand and say, I allowed this to happen without making every effort to stop it. So there is a real imperative on the US to do that. But I understand what you're saying, and I think, you know, it is probably going to have to come to that in the end, that the international community, including the US, including China, which I don't think is particularly pleased to see North Korean nuclear weapons on its borders, have to accept that North Korea has those things, and therefore the problem is how to manage it and how to come to some kind of political method, means by which you can handle disputes on the peninsula, how you can manage the fact of North Korea being a nuclear state. And there are all sorts of things the US can do. Yeah. And there's all sorts of things the North Koreans equally could do. And there's all sorts of things that the Chinese or indeed the South Koreans could do. But they have to be done somehow in concert.
Yes,
together.
And you can't get the concert going until all the parties are actually talking to each other, if not entirely multilaterally, then at least bilaterally. Finally, on the issue of sanctions, the South Koreans are going to have to lift some sanctions to allow North Korean officials to travel, for example, to discuss the Olympics and so on. Having been twice to North Korea, these sanctions are really serious. They have a really a level of attrition on the population that is impossible to bear. Is there a realistic possibility that sanctions could be relaxed?
I think, well, you're right in sort of practical terms about movement of North Korean officials. If they are bound by sanctions, then there have to be exceptions. I don't see any likelihood in the short term of a substantial lifting of sanctions, because there has been no movement from the North Korean side about giving some kind of guarantee about halting, at the very least, halting the development of its nuclear program. And until such time as that happens, I think it's going to be very difficult to get any substantive lifting of sanctions through the UN Security Council.
Well, skating on thin ice, but skating nonetheless.
Exactly.
Good luck to the Winter Olympics, and thank you for your expertise.
Coming up, a night of the Penknives as the Tory reshuffle goes off like a damp squib. Don't miss it.
Welcome back to Sputnik. British Tory Prime Minister Harold MacMillan, over half a century ago, famously laid down his friends for his political life in the night of the long knives. He reshuffled his decrepit, sclerotic cabinet in the hope of rescuing his collapsing political position. It failed, and not too long afterwards, he and then the Conservative Party had to fall on their swords.
Theresa May's position is even more precarious. Without a parliamentary majority, thanks to her own disastrous decision to call an early general election, there were precious few big beasts who even could be reshuffled this week. And in the event, the changes she did try to make were flatly refused by those she was seeking to reshuffle. Strong and stable it was? Not.
Joining us to discuss the political landscape in the aftermath is now celebrated political analyst, though you saw him here first, Matt Turner of the perspicacious Evolve Politics. Matt, welcome back to the Sputnik. You've become a television star since you first appeared on here, and we're taking some of the credit for that, as you just heard. Give us your expertise. Was this just about as bad a cabinet reshuffle as there has ever been?
Absolutely. You know, there was nothing strong or nothing stable about the last 48 hours. You know, in a bygone era, cabinet ministers used to serve at the pleasure of the Prime Minister. But now they are flatly refusing to resign, refusing to move, and refusing to respect the wishes of Theresa May. You know, it's pretty clear that she has no authority within her own party and no mandate from the general public. So why would these Conservative cabinet members actually respect her when she can't even command a real majority from the British public?
In the House, so they know they're in a stronger position. You're right about that. The origin of the idea of primus inter pares is that all the cabinet members are equal, but one of them is more equal than others, and she holds that position. And no prime minister, and I've been in politics under I don't know how many, certainly 10 at least, no prime minister that I know would ever have tolerated a cabinet member coming in and saying no. They would have been booted out the door with nothing if they had done so. So this indicates not just her weakness, but the relative strength of the ministers because of her weakness, doesn't it?
Yeah, precisely. And I think another really, really important point to emphasise here is if she cannot command that respect from her own cabinet ministers, how on earth are we meant to trust her at the negotiating table in the European Union when she's shown to be a complete and utter pushover from people like Jeremy Hunt, Justine Greening, Chris Grayling, you know, all of these people, not particularly political heavyweights.
Not exactly big beasts.
No.
Exactly.
And there was another one who I swear to you, as God's my judge, I had never heard of before, a man called Greg Clark, who was the business secretary. This unknown man, from a virtually unknown ministerial position, flatly told the Prime Minister he was not prepared to move. So if even someone like him feels so emboldened by the Prime Minister's weakness, as you say, it makes you wonder what Barnier and the Junkers and the other grandees in Europe, what they think of her.
And she's already a Remainer, which makes it even...
Well, yes, they know they're kind of pushing at an open door with her.
But the biggest insult must be Jeremy Hunt, no? To the people.
I think so. I think so, definitely. You know, we have seen over 5 years now of Jeremy Hunt as Health Secretary.
He's about to become the longest-serving Health Minister of all time.
Yeah, he's about to bypass Anara Bevan, I think, which is ridiculous considering the state that he has left the NHS in so far.
How bad does the NHS have to get before the Minister gets moved?
Well, to be honest, I think he's actually succeeding in their objective, which is to essentially defund it to the extent where people get angry and people demand change, and then kind of offer up privatisation or at least marketisation as an easy solution. And that is what Jeremy Hunt is desperate to do, which is why he pleaded with Theresa May to keep his position. But I think when you look at the crisis which the NHS is facing right now, hospitals up and down the country on black alert, you know, its relationship with the junior doctors in particular, but the NHS staff as a whole, is absolutely appalling. So if anybody should have been moved, it really should have been him. I think Theresa May, you know, I've heard that she did have plans to move him, and that probably would have been a politically savvy move, considering how loathed he is both, you know, in the healthcare sector and across Britain as a whole. But if he's just flat out refused, then, you know, it seems absolutely ridiculous how Theresa May can command any
it's most peculiar
respect.
because the newspapers were all briefed that he was going to take Damien Green's position, Green having had to leave because of his excessive use of the World Wide Web, and that he was going to be effectively the Deputy Prime Minister, this being the price of moving him from health. But that never happened. He didn't get moved from health. In fact, he's been given another huge pile of work in the form of social care, one of the biggest crises in British life today. So if he made such a, let's say, less than perfect job of running the NHS, why would you give him something monumental to handle in his spare time?
On top of it,
No, precisely. And this is what Jeremy Corbyn said at Prime Minister's questions, actually, because I think Jeremy Hunt, he kind of stated the case to Theresa May that he didn't want to, you know, abandon his ship, to which Jeremy Corbyn said, well, is that not an admission that the ship is in fact sinking? So I cannot believe that he's also been given the social care brief, given the fact that there is a huge crisis of social care in this country already. There's been no kind of clear solution either from Jeremy Hunt or the Conservative Party as a whole on how to actually address that. So it is beyond me how he's being rewarded, if anything, with extra responsibility.
Well, as we alluded in the introduction, this all has echoes of the early 1960s, before the collapse of the Conservative government of Alec Douglas-Home, who'd only been in a year because Harold MacMillan had to fall on his sword, having sacrificed his friends by the night of the long knives. It all has a resonance, you know, sex scandals, a government clearly running out of steam, and so on. Harold Wilson, waiting in the wings, was, I know you weren't around, and neither of you were, but I was. Harold Wilson looked like a man bursting to lead Britain, full of brim and ideas and modernity, a kind of man for the Beatles generation. Do you think that Jeremy Corbyn looks that way to the public in Britain?
I think post-election, absolutely. You know, he's had a real kind of jump in his confidence since that kind of, well, shock result back in June last year. And I think he's been emboldened.
A shock result predicted by both of us.
Yeah, no, exactly. You know, I think a few of us did see it. And a few of us did see that there is a wider crisis in the economic system that the Conservatives believe in. And the issue which they are having right now is that they are so focused on Brexit that they are not giving any attention to the fact that that economic consensus is no longer working for the majority of people. Now, Jeremy Corbyn is proposing something different, an alternative, and whether people actually agree with that alternative solidly or not, all they realise is that things do need to change.
The hegemony that the right enjoyed in the late 1970s under Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, which lasted more or less a decade, was a period in which all bright young things gravitated towards the right, towards the Conservative Party and its ideas of the free market, monetarism, and so on. They were hegemonic in the intellectual sphere. Isn't a measure of how not hegemonic they now are that they imagined that the crisis in their relations with students and the university sector might be resolved by pulling Toby Young into a frontline post in dealing with the young people? I found that very emblematic.
Absolutely. You know, the Toby Young appointment was by all means, you know, a complete catastrophe. Obviously, he's resigned due to pressure from both students and the Labour Party as well. So that is, on the whole, a good thing. But the idea that the Conservatives have is that they can suddenly repair relations with an age cohort that had been utterly neglected by not just them, but by, like you said, the kind of neoliberal hegemony over the last 3 decades or so.
Having tripled their university tuition fees in the meantime.
No, exactly. And it's kind of one of those things where I see Theresa May appointing as well a few nodding dogs who have kind of expressed the need on Twitter to rebrand the Conservative Party so that it appeals to the young. Somebody like James Cleverly, for example, who recently equated, you know, scrapping the public sector pay cap on the NHS with the policies of Stalin. You know, if him and, you know, Toff from Made in Chelsea... He is a clever fellow, though. Don't underestimate him. He's not called Cleverly for nothing. He was quite effective in the London Assembly. And he is, along with his chairman, the new chairman of the Conservative Party, they do represent a kind of class shift as well as ethnicity shift. Do you think the Tories have so run out of steam that nothing can save them? Yeah, I don't think that element of diversity is actually going to help them here, because people like Cleverly, as smart and as politically savvy as they may be, have not yet departed from the failed policies of the Cameron Osborne era.
So I know this question has been raised a lot, but do you think there's going to be another election? Because everything Theresa May seems to be doing and thinks is the right choice turns out not to be. I would love there to be another election soon, but I think due to the fixed-term Parliaments Act, that, you know, we may have to wait until 2022. 2022, just in time for you to enter the House of Commons. There's a prediction for you. Matt Turner, Evolve Politics. Thanks for joining us on the Sputnik. And now it's your turn to tell us what you think through the portals of social media. What's rattling, Gayatri? So North and South Korea are talking to each other. How significant are these talks? Shardy says a step in the right direction, whereas Mark Bobola says not at all. These talks mean nothing.
Well, I think if someone from the Royal Institute of International Affairs, Chatham House, as conservative a think tank as you can possibly find, and reflecting very often the views of the British government, the British state, think it's a significant development, it's a significant development.
I take it then. And the reshuffle, cabinet reshuffle, what do you make of it? Stuart Davidson says the reshuffle, she moved the couch into the corner. And Jasmine Stewart says, I think the 10 Downing Street cat would make the best Prime Minister Britain has ever seen.
Well, I described it as musical chairs on the deck of the Titanic. I still think that's the best.
That's all the time we've got for the tweets today.
Which, alas, means that's the end of the show.
But you can stay in touch with us on social media, on Facebook, Sputnik on Russia Today, or on Twitter and Instagram, RT_Sputnik. It's goodbye from me, Gayatri.
And from me, George Galloway. It's been marvellous.